Rio de Janeiro is known for its beaches, carnival, and breathtaking landscapes. But on one August night in 1993, a community in Rio witnessed something far darker. A group of armed men entered a favela seeking revenge. By sunrise, 21 people would be dead. Many of them had absolutely nothing to do with crime. This is the story of the Vigario Geral massacre, one of the most shocking episodes of violence in Brazilian history. To understand what happened, we have to go back a few days earlier. At the time, Rio de Janeiro was struggling with intense violence between drug gangs and police forces. On August 28, 1993, 4 police officers were ambushed and killed near the Vigario General neighborhood. The murders shocked the police force. Rumors quickly spread that the killers were linked to local criminals operating in the area. Anger began to boil, and some officers wanted revenge. In the early hours of August 30, while most residents were asleep, a convoy of vehicles approached the favela. Around 50 armed men, many later identified as police officers or former officers, entered the community. They were heavily armed. But they weren't conducting an official police operation. They were hunting. Witnesses would later describe scenes of absolute terror. The gunmen split into groups and moved through the narrow streets. They knocked on doors. They entered homes. They opened fire. Victims were shot in their bedrooms. Others were executed in bars and gathering places. The attackers showed little interest in determining who was involved in crime and who wasn't. Anyone in their path could become a target. One of the most haunting stories from that night came from a local bar. Several residents had gathered to play cards and spend time with friends. They weren't armed. They weren't fighting anyone. They were simply enjoying an ordinary evening. The gunmen arrived. Moments later, the gathering turned into a massacre. For many families, loved ones left home that night and never returned. When daylight arrived, the scale of the tragedy became clear. 21 people had been murdered. The victims included workers, fathers, young adults, and residents with no criminal records. The streets were filled with grief. Family members searched desperately for answers. How could something like this happen? And who would be held responsible? The massacre quickly became national news. Brazil was horrified. As investigators examined the crime, evidence pointed toward a disturbing conclusion. The massacre wasn't carried out by a drug gang. It appeared to be an act of revenge committed by members of the very institutions meant to protect the public. The case exposed the existence of so-called death squads, groups linked to police officers who operated outside the law. Several suspects were arrested. Some were eventually convicted. But many critics argued that justice was incomplete. Questions remained. Who organized the attack? How many people were involved? And how many escaped punishment? The Vigario General Massacre became more than a criminal case. It became a symbol of what can happen when revenge replaces justice, a symbol of the dangers of corruption and unchecked power, and a symbol of the innocent people who often become trapped between organized crime and violent responses to it. For residents of Rio's favelas, the massacre represented a painful reality. Sometimes the greatest threat wasn't just the criminals. It could also come from those carrying a badge. More than 3 decades later, the names of the 21 victims are still remembered. The tragedy remains one of the darkest chapters in modern Brazilian history. A reminder that justice cannot be built on revenge, and that when innocent lives are treated as collateral damage, entire communities suffer the consequences. The night of August 30th, 1993 lasted only a few hours.
but its scars remain to this day. If you want to see more tales of crimes, subscribe and hit the like button so you don't lose the next videos. Peace out.